The Christmas door slam. How I broke free from a family that used me and rebuilt my life. The weight of a ghost, becoming the family's pillar. The sting of that Christmas Eve rejection wasn't an isolated wound. It was the culmination of years of unseen sacrifices, a pattern that began long before, on a day that reshaped my young life, the day the weight of a ghost settled onto my 13-year-old shoulders. The day my mother, Althea, walked away. She left behind more than just a gaping hole in our lives. She pressed a secret into my palm, the small, intricately carved locked wooden box. Her fingers, cool against mine, trembled slightly. "You'll know when the time is right to open this, my brave Ilara," she'd whispered, her eyes, usually so full of light, clouded with an emotion I couldn't decipher then. "Don't let them break your spirit." A final, fleeting kiss on my forehead, another for my 7-year-old brother, Marcus, who clung to her skirt, his face a mask of confusion. And then, she was gone, 2 suitcases clicking down the path. Did I expect my father, Arthur, to race after her, to beg her to stay? Maybe a younger, more naive me did. Instead, he just lit a cigarette, the smoke coiling around his impassive face like a shroud. "She was never built for responsibility," was all he said, the words as cold and final as the click of the front door. He then sank onto the couch, the TV flickering to life, and didn't move, didn't speak, for hours. Responsibility. Funny, wasn't it? Because in that moment, it felt like all the responsibility in the world had been bundled up and handed directly to me. That was the first day I cooked dinner. A disaster. The rice was a gummy, overboiled mess. The eggs, intended to be fluffy and comforting, were charred offerings to a new, unwelcome era. Yet, Marcus, bless his innocent heart, looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes and mumbled, "Thank you, Ilara." His small voice was the only warmth in that suddenly vast and chilly kitchen. And I thought, this is it then, this is me now. By 16, life was a blur of motion, a constant, grinding effort. Was I even a teenager anymore? Or just a machine built for work? My alarm shrieked at 5 a.m., hauling me from a few snatched hours of sleep to knead dough and decorate pastries at the local bakery before school, the scent of sugar and yeast clinging to me like a second skin. After classes, where I often struggled to keep my eyes open, I'd scrub other people's houses, erasing their messes while my own life felt increasingly chaotic. Weekends. They were for babysitting the children of families who looked at me with a mixture of pity and something that felt like I was a walking charity case. "Oh, that Ilara," I imagined them saying, "such a hard worker, poor thing." And Arthur? He stayed home. "Depression," he'd sigh, rubbing his back. This old back of mine, he'd groan. Who was there to argue? Who else was there to pick up the pieces he so readily let fall? Just me. College. Yes, that had been a dream, a vibrant, shimmering hope. I had the grades, the drive, a folder full of commendations. But tuition fees. They were a cruel joke when you were constantly juggling rent, groceries for 3, and the ever-present fear of the electricity being cut off. So, I deferred. Then deferred again. Eventually, I stopped checking the deadlines for applications. My deferred dreams gathered dust in a corner of my mind. Instead, I worked. 3 jobs. Sometimes more, if I could find the hours. Every month, like a silent, dutiful ghost, I'd slide envelopes of cash into the chipped ceramic jar in the kitchen drawer. Rent. Utilities. Gas. Sometimes, a hastily scrawled note would appear, "Marcus field trip," or "Dad inhaler refill." I always covered it. Always. Without a word. Quietly, unseen, I watched Marcus grow. He had clean sneakers, the latest tablet for schoolwork, lunches packed with expensive treats I'd never tasted myself. He seemed happy, oblivious. And why wouldn't he be? His world was stable, cushioned by my sacrifice. I watched Arthur stay still, his universe shrinking to the flickering images on the television screen, flipping through channels, as if he were flipping through responsibilities he no longer claimed. Did anyone ever say thank you? Rarely. So rarely that the occasional, mumbled thanks felt like a shock. But I told myself I didn't do it for that. I just wanted to matter. I wanted to be seen, not as a provider, but as Ilara. Was that too much to ask? To be more than a paycheck with legs? The small, locked box from Althea sat hidden in my underwear drawer, beneath stacks of worn-out socks. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the ache in my bones from a 16-hour workday was a dull throb, I'd take it out. I'd trace the intricate carvings. Were they flowers? Or swirling, secret symbols? Its weight felt significant in my palm, a tangible piece of my mother's secret, a silent promise. What was inside? Answers to why she left. A clue to a future where I wasn't just a pillar, holding everyone else up. I'd press my ear to the wood, hoping to hear something. But I never felt it was the right time to seek a key, to force it open. My spirit, she'd warned, not to let them break it. Maybe opening it too soon would do just that. So, the mystery remained, a quiet, unspoken weight added to the burden I already carried. Years blurred into a monotonous cycle of work, bills, and a gnawing emptiness. Then came Marcus's high school graduation. A milestone. They threw a party, balloons, a store-bought cake, Arthur making a surprisingly jovial speech about his son's bright future. I stood in the corner, clapping until my palms stung, a polite smile plastered on my face. No one mentioned I'd covered Marcus's graduation fees, or the deposit for his community college application. No one mentioned the new laptop he'd unwrapped that morning, the one I'd saved for months to buy, picking up extra cleaning shifts. Look how far he's come, relatives cooed. No one ever asked how. When Marcus, beaming, pulled me into a hug during his own little speech, and called me his second mom, the smile I gave him felt like it might crack my jaw. And later, when a well-meaning neighbor patted my arm and said, "Ilara, dear, you truly are the backbone of this family," I just nodded. A compliment, right? But it felt like a confession, a life sentence. Because deep down, a voice screamed, I don't want to be the backbone. I wanted to be a daughter. A sister. A person. Not an invisible, unthanked structure they all leaned on, a structure they'd long since forgotten was even there, slowly crumbling under the strain. The locked box in my drawer suddenly felt heavier, its secrets pressing down on me with a new, suffocating urgency. But even a backbone can be chipped away, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day, the cracks become too obvious to ignore, the erosion of self too painful to endure. It's funny how you can become a ghost in your own life, isn't it? Not all at once, not with a dramatic, theatrical flourish. No, it's more of a slow fade, like an old photograph left in the sun, your features blurring until you're barely recognizable, even to yourself. An exclusion so subtle, you almost convince yourself you're imagining it. Almost. It started with the silence on my phone. The family group chat, the one Marcus had enthusiastically named Famiglia MIA Red Heart # years ago, complete with an excessive number of heart emojis, used to buzz constantly. Dad's blurry photos of his dinner, random memes from Marcus, forwarded good morning messages from distant aunties I barely knew. Then, the notifications dwindled. Stopped. One night, a knot of unease tightening in my chest, I opened the chat. Just curious. They were planning something. A big Sunday barbecue at Aunt Cordelia's new place by the lake. I scrolled. And scrolled. 2 weeks of messages. Carpooling arrangements, animated discussions about who was bringing potato salad versus coleslaw, inside jokes that made my stomach clench. My name. Nowhere. I searched for Ilara. No results. My fingers, trembling slightly, typed out a simple, hopeful message. Sounds fun. What time should I come? I stared at the screen, waiting for the little red receipts to appear, for someone to say, "Oh, Ilara, of course, come around 1." Silence. Deafening, crushing silence. The next morning, the chat name had changed. Now it just read, Sunday Crew. No heart. And definitely no Ilara. My own blood, phasing me out with the casual indifference of a software update. I told myself it was an accident. Maybe they thought I was too busy with my jobs. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't want to go. Easier lies to swallow than the bitter pill of truth, right? That I was becoming invisible. A few weeks later, there was a sprawling extended family gathering, one of those rare, command performance events. I'd felt a familiar sense of isolation settling over me, a cloak I couldn't seem to shake off. I was nursing a lukewarm punch in a corner when a woman I vaguely recognized as a distant, somewhat eccentric relative, Aunt Sefina, approached me. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, seemed to see right through the polite smile I'd plastered on. She leaned in, her voice a low murmur against the cacophony of forced cheer. "Don't let them hollow you out, child," she'd whispered, her fingers briefly gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Some trees need to fall to let the sun truly shine in." Then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone, leaving me stunned and her cryptic warning echoing in my ears. Hollow me out. Trees falling. What did that even mean? Yet, her words snagged in my mind, a strange little burr of intrigue. The real turning point, the moment the last vestiges of my denial shattered, came on a Tuesday. I'd dragged myself home early from a particularly grueling double shift at the diner, my feet throbbing, my head pounding from exhaustion, and the relentless smell of stale coffee and fried food. As I paused in the hallway, shrugging off my worn coat, I heard Marcus's voice from the kitchen, punctuated by laughter. He was on the phone. "Nah, man, she's not really family, you know." He chuckled. My breath hitched. "More like our roommate with benefits, financial ones, that is." "Seriously? She's always working anyway, we barely see her." "But hey," another laugh, colder this time, "she pays the rent, covers the bills, even cooks when she's actually around. So it kinda works out for us." A pause. More laughter from the other end of the line. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. Not family. A roommate. With money. The words, so casually cruel, were like shards of ice piercing my heart. The air in my lungs turned to stone. I didn't cry out. Didn't storm into the kitchen demanding an explanation. What would have been the point? They'd already written my role in their story. I just walked, quietly, on numb legs, to my small room, the one they often mocked for being tiny, and shut the door. That was the moment something inside me split. Not shattered, not exploded. Just a clean, quiet break. A part of me drifted away and knew, with chilling certainty, it was never coming back. From that day on, I started observing. Really seeing. When Arthur casually asked if I could just front the electricity bill for now, I paid it. And then I meticulously saved the receipt, filing it away. When Marcus borrowed another 54 textbooks he never seemed to buy, I Venmo'd him and took a screenshot. I made copies of utility bills paid from my account, backed up emails with polite requests for financial help, archived every digital transaction, every transfer, every favor disguised as a casual, familial request. Not out of spite. Not then, anyway. It was for preservation. My own. Because Aunt Sefina's cryptic warning about trees falling started to make a terrible kind of sense. I finally understood that love, or what I had mistaken for love, given to the undeserving, was a dangerous kind of debt. And I was the one drowning in the accumulated interest. I stopped asking to be included. I stopped reminding them I existed. I started becoming what they already saw me as, a shadow. A useful, bill-paying shadow. But even shadows learn. Even shadows can grow teeth. And the silence I began to cultivate, the kind that watches and waits and gathers its strength, well, that kind of silence can be the most dangerous sound in the world. The Christmas Eve rejection wasn't a sudden storm. It was the lightning strike that illuminated a path already slowly, deliberately being cleared by Alara herself, a path paved with the chilling realization of her true place in their lives. They say silence is golden. But have you ever wielded it as a weapon? A shield? That night, it wasn't just a door slammed in my face, it was a signal. The game had changed. And I, the ever-compliant, ever-giving Alara, was about to rewrite all the rules with nothing but quiet, decisive keystrokes. I returned to my small, cramped apartment, the one Arthur often joked was barely big enough to swing a cat in, though he never seemed to mind when my rent payments for his spacious house cleared. The pie-eyed bake sat on my tiny counter, a sad, unwanted monument to a hope that had finally, irrevocably, died. There were no tears that night. Just a cold, razor-sharp clarity. Anger. Oh, it was there, a simmering coal deep inside, but it was banked, controlled, channeled into something far more productive. I opened my laptop, its familiar hum a counterpoint to the storm of emotions I refused to unleash. One by one, I logged into every account I shared with them, every financial thread that bound me to their parasitic existence. First, the rent. The automatic transfer to Arthur's account, the one that had faithfully departed my own meager funds for years. Click. Cancelled. A new savings account materialized on my banking app, one under my name only. I typed in the name, the Phoenix Fund. A small, defiant smile touched my lips. It felt good. Next, the joint grocery card, the one Marcus swiped with such casual entitlement for his endless stream of snacks, takeout, and essentials that often looked suspiciously like new video games. Blocked. A new digital card, linked solely to my email, was requested. No more physical plastic for them to borrow. Streaming services Netflix, Hulu, the ridiculously expensive sports package Arthur insisted was vital for his bad back recovery, all devices logged out. My emergency contacts, meticulously updated to remove anyone who shared their surname. Each click was a snip, a severing. Aunt Sefina's words about trees falling echoed in my mind. Yes, some trees definitely needed to fall, and I was wielding the axe. No angry texts, no tearful confrontations, no dramatic ultimatums. Just precise, silent action. Why waste breath on those who'd proven they wouldn't listen anyway? Days later, armed with a newfound sense of purpose, and my quietly accumulating Phoenix Fund, I found it. A small studio apartment on the other side of town, nestled above a quiet bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, no sprawling views or designer finishes. But it was cozy. It was quiet. And, most importantly, it was gloriously, unequivocally mine. The landlord, a kind-faced older gentleman named Mr. Henderson, perused my application, nodding. "Excellent credit, Ms. Alara," he'd said, his eyes twinkling. "Clean record. Wish all my tenants were this reliable." Reliable. Funny, wasn't it? At home, with Arthur and Marcus, I was an afterthought, a burden who just happened to pay for everything. Here, to a stranger, I was reliable. The irony wasn't lost on me. He handed me the keys 2 days later. Packing became my nightly ritual, a clandestine operation conducted in the hushed hours after my shifts. Piece by piece, I gathered my life. Clothes, a few cherished books, the laptop I'd bought with a hard-earned bonus. I was careful, methodical. I left behind the things they had given me over the years, the occasional, cheap birthday trinket, the sweater Arthur's sister had regifted. They were scraps of their conditional affection, and I wanted no part of them anymore. If my worth to them was purely material, they could keep the material reminders. The morning I moved, the house was still. Arthur was undoubtedly still asleep, lost in his televised dream world. Marcus, I presumed, was at the gym, sculpting the physique my earnings indirectly supported. I didn't leave a note. What could I possibly write that they would understand, or even care to read? My departure was a statement in itself. An echoing silence where my presence and my money used to be. That same day, in the quiet sanctuary of my new studio, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, I created one final, crucial file. Digital and hard copy, meticulously organized, I labeled it, the Ledger of Truth. Every bank transaction, every utility bill payment, every invoice for Marcus's college supplies, every screenshot of those casual, entitled text messages asking for money, every receipt I'd saved. Years of it. It wasn't for a lawsuit. The thought of dragging this through a court felt more exhausting than liberating. No, this ledger, this testament to years of being their unseen provider, was for me. To own my story. To have irrefutable proof, if only for myself, that I wasn't imagining the imbalance, the exploitation. That I wasn't the crazy one. The quiet departure was complete. The stage was set. And I had a feeling the silence wouldn't last for long on their end. It only took 3 days. 3 short days for the first tremors of my silent earthquake to reach the oblivious inhabitants of the house I'd left behind, the house built on my unseen sacrifices. You ever just sit back and watch the chaos you didn't start, but definitely catalyzed? That was me, nursing a cup of chamomile tea in my new, blessedly quiet studio, when my phone, now largely silent, buzzed with an unfamiliar urgency. It was Marcus. Of course, it was Marcus. Ilara. His voice, usually so laid back and confident, was sharp with annoyance. Dad's trying to pay the utilities online, and his login isn't working. Did you change the password or something? He's freaking out. I took a slow sip of my tea, the warmth a stark contrast to the ice in his tone. I don't live there anymore, Marcus, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, even to my own ears. A scoff crackled down the line. What? What are you talking about? You're seriously going to ruin Christmas over some little tantrum, because of what Dad said? Grow up, Ilara. A tantrum. That's what he called it. Years of being their financial and emotional crutch, dismissed in an instant as a childish fit. This isn't a tantrum, Marcus, I replied, the words clear and steady. It's an overdue correction. And then, I did something I'd never had the courage to do before. I pressed end call. Click. The ensuing silence from my phone felt powerful. But the silence from their end, that didn't last long. Oh no. The frantic calls and texts started almost immediately, a digital barrage of panic and entitlement. First Arthur, his voice a tight, barely concealed growl on the voicemails I let go unanswered. Then Marcus again, his tone shifting from annoyance to outright pleading, then back to anger. Even Aunt Cordelia, who usually only remembered my existence when she needed a last-minute babysitter, or a small loan, chimed in with a flurry of increasingly agitated messages. Ilara, this is ridiculous, your father is beside himself. We need the rent money, you can't just abandon us. You're being incredibly selfish, the electric bill is overdue. Selfish? After everything? I almost laughed. The prize, though, went to Arthur's voicemail, left late one night. His voice, usually booming and self-assured, was strained, laced with a forced calm that barely masked the underlying desperation. "Ilara," he'd begun, his tone attempting to sound reasonable, fatherly. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this needs to stop. You need to grow up. Family doesn't abandon each other." Abandoned. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Where was all this concern for family, when I stood on his doorstep with a pie and he'd looked through me like I was a stranger? Now, suddenly, when the well ran dry, I was family again. Amazing, isn't it? I didn't answer. I let them scream into the void. Then, the inevitable consequences of their reliance began to cascade. A week after I'd left, the power at the old house was cut off. Aunt Cordelia called again, her voice shrill. Not to ask if I was okay, of course not. But because Arthur was, in her words, having a complete meltdown in the dark. "The lights just went out, Ilara. Your father says something's terribly wrong with the account." "I'm not on the account anymore, Aunt Cordelia," I stated flatly. "They'll have to call the company themselves." Click. Next came the email from Mr. Henderson, my old landlord. "Dear Ms. Ilara Khan," it began. I'd always used my full name on official documents, a small, unnoticed act of individuality. "Rent for this month has not been received for the property at 12 Oak Street. Is everything all right?" I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. He still thought I lived there. I replied promptly, attaching a copy of my signed lease termination letter and the receipt for my final month's payment, politely informing him that I was no longer a tenant and that all future communications should be directed to Mr. Arthur Thorne and Mr. Marcus Khan at that address. I even provided Marcus's full name, a little formality they'd never afforded me. The fallout from that, I heard later, was spectacular. Apparently, Arthur flipped out, according to a rather colorful text from a cousin who clearly relished the drama. Marcus's community college tuition payment bounced. I'd forgotten that was due. The supplementary grocery card I'd cancelled was declined when he tried to buy a mountain of energy drinks. Even the Wi-Fi, which I'd paid for under my name for years, went dark. One by one, the invisible threads I'd been quietly holding, the threads that kept their comfortable world stitched together, unraveled. It was a few weeks later when Mrs. Petrov, my former next-door neighbor with an uncanny ability to know everyone's business, called me under the guise of checking in. After the usual pleasantries, she got to the real juice. "Oh, Ilara dear," she'd said, her voice conspiratorial, "you wouldn't believe the shouting matches over there. The other night, Arthur and young Marcus were going at it something fierce. Thin walls, you know." She paused for dramatic effect. "I heard Arthur yell something about your mother, Althea. He said, now let me get this right. If she ever finds out the real reason Althea left, that it wasn't just about her not handling responsibility, well, then Marcus shouted him down. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, dear? The real reason. Not just about responsibility." Mrs. Petrov's words, a casual piece of relayed gossip, landed like a stone in my stomach, sending ripples through the fragile peace I was building. Another secret. Another layer to the complex, painful history of my family. The thought was unsettling. It added yet another strand to the tangled web they'd woven, another question mark hanging over my mother's departure, over everything. My resolve to stay away, to protect myself, hardened. They weren't just users, they were keepers of secrets, too. And for the first time, a flicker of something beyond just wanting to be free ignited within me, a desire to know the whole truth, no matter how much it might hurt. The reckoning, it seemed, was far from over. But talking to them, trying to extract truth from a well so thoroughly poisoned by years of deceit, that felt like willingly walking back into a burning building. No. The most important conversation I needed to have, the reckoning that truly mattered, was with myself, and with a future I was finally ready to build from the ashes of my past. And so, the healing, the real reclamation, began. The desire to understand the tangled mess of my family, especially that newly hinted secret from Mrs. Petrov about my mother, Althea, burned within me. But I knew I couldn't face it alone, not yet. So, I took a deep breath and made a call. My first therapy session with Dr. Ramirez felt like stepping into a quiet, sunlit room after years spent in a shadowy maze. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, she listened, her gaze kind but unwavering, as the story of my life, the years of shouldering unseen burdens, spilled out. When I finally faltered, confessing my decision to cut ties, expecting judgment, she simply said, "Ilara, it takes immense courage to redraw your own map, especially when the old one was forced upon you. You're not broken, you're beginning." For the first time, I really cried, not from weakness, but from a profound, aching release. Funny how shedding emotional weight makes actual life feel lighter, brighter. Work, once a draining necessity, started to feel different. Without the constant anxiety of providing for three, I had more energy, more focus. My manager noticed. 3 months into my new life, she called me in. "Ilara," she said, a warm smile on her face, "there's a lead position opening up on the new Riverside project. It needs someone steady, someone with a clear head and quiet determination. It's yours if you want it. Steady. Not stuck. Not struggling. Just steady." It felt incredible. And friends. Real ones began to appear, drawn perhaps to the tentative light now flickering within me. I joined a pottery class on a whim, needing to feel the earth, to create something with my own hands. There I met Chloe, a vibrant single mom with a laugh that could fill a room and eyes that understood the cost of silence. "You carry the quiet strength of a survivor, Ilara," she told me one evening, her hands covered in clay as we worked side by side. "It's like you've been through a fire and come out, glazed." We both laughed, and it was easy, genuine. These were people who asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. People who didn't just call when they needed a ride or a financial bailout. My little studio apartment, my sanctuary, slowly transformed. Each piece of second-hand furniture, I found a faded velvet armchair, a slightly wobbly bookshelf, a chipped teacup that fit perfectly in my hand, was chosen with love, a testament to my own taste, my own choices. This was my true home, a space that didn't demand a performance, but simply welcomed me as I was. One quiet evening, with rain pattering softly against the window, my gaze fell upon Althea's locked wooden box. It sat on my new bookshelf, amongst the books I had chosen. For years, it had been a symbol of mystery, of unanswered questions, perhaps even a touch of resentment. But now, something felt different. A strong, undeniable pull. I remembered a tiny, almost invisible brass key, intricately shaped like a feather. I'd found it years ago, tucked inside an old, tarnished silver locket of my mother's that I'd kept after she left, a locket Arthur had dismissed as worthless. I'd kept the key, not knowing why, just feeling I should. My heart hammered as I retrieved it from a small trinket dish. With trembling fingers, I inserted it into the box's tiny lock. It turned smoothly. Inside, there was no money, no jewels. Just a few faded letters, tied with a brittle blue ribbon, and a small, perfectly pressed wildflower, a forget-me-not. My breath caught. The letters, addressed to someone named Dearest Anya, a friend I never knew Althea had, painted a picture so vastly different from the one Arthur had peddled for years. They spoke of Althea's suffocation, of Arthur's subtle, controlling nature, his way of diminishing her, of her growing fear that he was beginning to turn that same quiet emotional erosion onto me, her brave Ilara. One line seared itself into my soul. "I have to leave, Anya. Not for me anymore, but for her. I left so she might one day see the bars of her own cage and find the strength to fly free. Tears streamed down my face as I read, a torrent of understanding, of grief for the mother I never truly knew, and an overwhelming wave of gratitude. Her sacrifice. Her unspoken truth. It wasn't abandonment. It was an act of desperate, protective love. A profound sense of release washed over me, as if a heavy chain I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally snapped. This was the healing I craved. A few weeks later, feeling a new sense of purpose, of reclamation, I started a blog. I called it The Unspoken Thread. I wrote about my experiences, about the quiet ways families can wound, and the even quieter ways we can begin to heal. I hit publish on my first post, my heart pounding, terrified of judgment. But the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments, shares, messages from people, mostly women, who saw their own stories in mine. I thought I was alone, one wrote. You put into words what I felt for years, but couldn't name, said another. I wasn't alone. And in sharing my unspoken truth, I was helping others find their voices too. Even Aunt Sefina found her way to my blog. She sent a simple, private message. The sun is finally reaching you, child. The trees have fallen. Well done. I sit by my window sometimes, a soft green fern thriving on the sill, the letters from my mother, Althea, nestled safely in their box. My blog, The Unspoken Thread, has new comments every day, a chorus of voices finding their own strength. A sense of profound peace often settles over me then, the city lights twinkling outside, no longer a reminder of what I was missing, but a testament to the world I was building, brick by painstaking brick. 7 months. 7 months since that Christmas Eve, since I'd walked away from the wreckage of what I once called family. And just when I thought the ghosts of Christmas past were truly laid to rest, an email pinged in my inbox. From Arthur. The subject line was stark, just 2 words, can we talk? No other text, no preamble. Just that. I stared at it for a full minute, the cursor blinking patiently. Surprisingly, there was no surge of anger, no tremor of fear. Just a distant, weary recognition. He didn't want me, he wanted access, he wanted the convenience, the support, the silence he'd mistaken for acquiescence. I thought of the previous Christmas Eve, the pie growing cold in my hands, his icy dismissal. Now, this. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop, brewed a cup of fragrant Earl Grey tea, and lit a single cinnamon-scented candle. Outside, a gentle snow had begun to fall. It was Christmas Eve again. This year, there was no frantic rush, no forced dinner party to prepare for, no heavy anticipation of strained conversations and empty toasts. Just a calm, enveloping quiet, the kind that feels like a warm hug for the soul. This was my new tradition, peace. My journey had been a lot. The pain had been a relentless chisel, but it had also carved away the parts of me that weren't truly mine. They, Arthur and Marcus, had inadvertently taught me so much. They taught me that love, or what some people call love, can indeed be cruel, that the word family can be twisted into a leash, but they also, without ever meaning to, taught me how to leave. How to finally listen to the persistent ache in my own chest, and give it what it so desperately craved, freedom. They taught me how to stop performing worthiness for an audience too blind, or too self-absorbed, to see it. How to build my own table, instead of begging for a seat at theirs. Sometimes, a text will still pop up from a distant cousin, or an old family friend. Hope you're doing okay, Ilara. Arthur's been asking about you, you know. I leave them all unread. It's not bitterness that keeps my finger from tapping reply. It's betterness. A quiet knowing that my energy is precious, reserved now for those who see me, who value me. That night, Curled up under my softest blanket, the city lights casting a gentle glow on my walls, I whispered something to the stillness of my new, true home. I used to knock on doors that didn't open for me, I murmured, a small smile playing on my lips. Now, I build my own. And I always leave it open for the right people. The greatest revenge, I realized with a clarity that warmed me from the inside out, wasn't watching their world crumble, it was witnessing and celebrating my own quiet, unshakable rise. My liberation,